So, welcome back to our conversations. This is St. Luke United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Chad Jennings. This is Joel Mills. Welcome, Joel. And we've been having a great time over the last several weeks, having conversations about deep issues in the faith. And we're coming back to you with another episode of this. Joel, what's your question tonight?
So back in high school, little bit of a background before I ask the question. So in high school, I was a pretty good athlete, and still consider myself at 36 to be an athlete. And with that, I ran cross country, played basketball. I was involved kind of here, there, and everywhere around high school. It was a small school, so I was fortunate enough to. You didn't necessarily have to make a varsity, but rather just if you were good, you got to probably be on the varsity team. So I actually was kind of the number 2 runner coming out of my sophomore year, my junior year, and then my senior year. There was always just typically one individual, one maybe 2 that were faster than me, but one for sure. But I guess my big question tonight is, as I entered my senior year of cross country, which is a fall sport here in the state of Iowa, never played football or anything like that, but as I entered my senior year, I want to say, if I remember correctly, because it was 16 years ago, I think I competed in 1, maybe 2 cross-country meets, they're called, and they're held at local golf courses. And then I actually had a shin splint so bad that upon x-ray after the meet, my lower left leg had actually broken. The main, I forget the main bone there in the leg, tibia. I want to say, yeah, the tibia. So it had broken there at the ankle, and it was just kind of grinding upon itself. So, I kind of thought to myself, well, maybe this is my fault. I wasn't necessarily taking care of my body as well as I should have. Could have had a better diet. Could have trained a little bit less, or backed off on training. But again, it's your senior year. You really want to excel. You want to be the best. And so here I was. I think it was my second meet of my senior year, maybe my third, with a broken leg and out for the rest of the season. So quite literally a season-ending and therefore career-ending injury. When I was looking upon at possible state that year, certainly wanted to compete well at the district level and maybe even make it to state. So as I kind of look back on that, I guess my big question is, was that a part of God's plan? Or, I don't know, was that my fault? And if it was a part of God's plan, like why would God allow a bad thing like that to happen to, I'm going to say, I thought I was a good person. I was doing the right things and going to church and leading Bible studies and trying to do the right thing there in high school. So it's like, well, why now? And I still kind of look back on that with a little bit of annoyance. I feel like something was kind of taken away from me, if you will. Frustration. I don't know.
So
a lot of questions there.
I'm hearing a couple of pretty major questions.
Okay, yeah.
In that
sorry.
scenario.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. So we'll just figure out where you want to go with this. So one of the things that you said was like, why, if I was being really good and doing stuff at church and being faithful, why did this bad thing happen to me? Which is sometimes stated like, why do bad things happen to good people?
Okay.
So there's one question. But the other question you asked is, was this part of God's plan?
Yeah.
And that question is really like, is my life laid out and I'm following this trajectory? And if that's the case, then was breaking my leg a piece of that plan?
Yeah, let's start there, please, because it's just dwelled with me still kind of to this day, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and so so one of the things that I think brings us to a question like that is people see things that happen in their life, and maybe even looking back on it, they see that something positive happened out of something negative that happened in their life, and so then they wonder, did I have to go through that bad thing in order for this good thing to happen? So let me bring up something from my own life that might
Okay.
go along with this, okay?
All right.
That might explain this. So when I was 15, my dad committed suicide. Or he died by suicide. That's the way we say it now, right? He died by suicide.
Okay.
And of course, devastating experience, especially for, a young kid, right? So
Wow.
it was 2 weeks after I turned 15. And it's tax day, so I can even remember like what day it was. It was April 15th. And so this horrible thing happened. And, you hear all of the platitudes. You hear things like, well, this must have happened for a reason, or
Mhm.
God has a plan for you, and so you just have to hang on, right?
Wow.
And really, people are just trying to say things that will ease the pain, and they don't know what to do to fix the problem, and the problem with that is it can't be fixed.
Sure.
So I'm not equating your broken leg to what happened to me. These are not equal, but
Mhm.
it is something that you had your whole plan laid out before you, the thing that you wanted to accomplish that year, and
Yeah.
it was stopped dead
Sure.
because of something that happened. And so then you have to, you probably even heard this from folks like, well, it's not the end of your life, or
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world, things like that. But for you at that time, it really was, and profoundly affected you so much that you're still thinking about it. Even today, it came up, right,
Mhm.
in thinking about this. And so if we fast forward to many years later, like I had to work through what it meant to have a father who took his own life.
Yeah, Chad.
Well,
Wow,
yeah, and I
that's-
didn't.
I had no
didn't mean,
idea.
Well, and I didn't mean to make that part of the subject, but
Mhm.
it's important for this conversation. So,
Okay.
how do you deal with something like that? Well, over time, and being in church and knowing that I was probably going to be in church my whole life, and how do you deal with this kind of thing?
Yes.
The church at that time would tell you that it was an unforgivable sin, and so he was in hell, and so how do you work through something like that, right?
As
and
a
how do you-
15-year-old.
And how do you not like just turn your back on everything? And so I had to work through a lot of this, and it took me several years to do that.
I can
Right?
imagine.
Okay,
Yeah.
and some really diligent friends that helped me to get through that. So, but I did. I got through it, and I came to understand that mental health is as much of a disease as anything physically that we have in our health. And he had mental health issues to the point where he had physical issues. It manifested itself in physical pain. And he just could not see past the next day. He just couldn't. And so we say died by suicide rather than committed something, because it's like dying by cancer. It's not something you chose for yourself. Even if it's by your own action,
Mhm.
it's not something you chose. It is something that has taken over your life to the point where you can't get out of that, right?
Sure.
And so then, what good could ever come from anything like that? Except in my first appointment as a pastor,
Okay.
I got a knock on my door in late afternoon, and it was a young man in his 20s who was just hysterically bawling. And I'm trying to listen really hard to what he says, and finally I hear him say, "My dad shot himself." And so, like, what young pastor who's been
Yeah.
a pastor for a couple of years would know anything of what to say at that moment,
Sure.
except that I'd been through this experience.
Yeah, except you.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was able to, over the course of not only working with that family, but also dealing with that small community
Mhm.
that pretty quickly heard what had happened. The rumors
Mhm.
fly pretty well,
Oh yeah.
and the lines of communication through the back channels are always there, right?
Yep.
It's one of the things you love about a small town, and that you talk about all the time is being a bad part of small town living, but it's both, right?
Sure.
So the ability to be at that funeral and to be able to tell folks that this, as much as a brain tumor, is something that just takes over your life and eventually takes over so much so that there's no coming back from it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And an inoperable brain tumor will eventually grow to the point where you can no longer live.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same kind of thing in my mind. And so because I'd worked through all that, and because I'd figured out that a God that loves us would not, and forgives us for anything that we do, would not simply say, well, that's the one thing I can't forgive. Like, how can a God forgive everything but one thing?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've come to the understanding, and I firmly believe this, that my dad is not condemned to hell forever because of that,
Mm-hmm.
because it's as much a physical illness as any other physical illness. It just manifests itself
Mm-hmm.
in mental illness, right? Of course, we've learned so much more about mental illness over the years.
Yeah.
But because of that bad experience and my working through it, I was able to do some good down the road. So then the question becomes, did I have to go through that bad experience
Yeah, exactly.
in order to be able to be helpful in this good experience? And the answer to that is probably no,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly helped. So then if you take that question a step farther, did God cause this bad thing to happen in my life so that I could help this family later? And in that case, what a horrible God that would be. What a
Well, yeah.
horrible God
Yeah.
would cause you pain
Yeah.
so that you could relieve the pain of somebody else. And,
Right.
and so often these questions that are like this, they solve one problem, but they don't solve all the problems.
Yeah, it's not.
And if you extrapolate it out, if you really think it through, bad theology just makes more bad theology.
There's not a lot of comfort there.
There's not a lot of comfort there. So the easy answer would be to say, yeah, you broke your leg, and it was all part of God's plan, and you may not know yet why that had to happen, so that you'd be able to have something good come out of it, because all things work together for the good, that, for those who love Him, right? We hear that scripture all the time because of that. And so you just got to be faithful and wait to find out why that bad thing happened to you so that something good can come out of it later. Okay. So I firmly believe that bad things happen because they happen.
All right.
And you broke your leg that night because your leg was weak.
Yep.
And you can talk about nutrition, you can talk about training, and maybe there was a choice that you could make that would have prevented it, but probably not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There was just a weakness there that you had no reason to know about before the break,
Sure.
and the break was the result of that.
Yeah.
Right? So did God make that happen, or did it just happen? Okay. So that kind of eliminates the idea of there being a set plan
All
that
right.
God has for you. And this is going to raise the ire of many like Christians out there
Uh-huh.
who think that because God is in control of the universe,
Yep.
and because we are so out of control with everything else, we really just want to know that something or someone is in control, because we have none,
Especially lately.
especially lately.
Yeah.
And so then if if someone who really thinks about these things says, but God, maybe God has the ability to have control, but God does not exert that ability, because if God exerted that ability, then we would be puppets, not people. And can can you have a real relationship if you are in sole control over somebody else? If you manipulate everything that happens,
Yeah.
if you don't allow anybody else to have, self-destination or free will,
Mm-hmm.
can that really be love? Can it really be a real relationship? Even if you're doing it for somebody's own good, even if you're just doing it to protect that person, or because you know what will allow them to have a fantastic life if they would just follow these 5 steps that you have laid out for them in a plan.
Mm-hmm.
If you manipulated them so that they would follow that, is that really allowing them a full life? Is it really allowing for a full relationship?
Right. Not a lot of trust there.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do we call that if it happens between spouses?
Controlling
And maybe even abuse.
and abusive. Yeah.
Yeah. Emotional abuse. Might be some physical abuse involved, but really, definitely emotional
Mm-hmm.
abuse, right? That
Sure.
kind of relationship we would look at. We'd say, looks good from the outside, but doesn't
Yeah.
look good from the inside. So, would a loving God do that?
Gotcha.
This is complicated by the fact that there are scriptures that talk about a preordained plan. That
Oh, yeah.
the story of your life is written from in the womb, right? Like, I have searched you and known you. I knew you before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
We have all of these scriptures that talk about God's all-knowing nature
Mm-hmm.
and God's ability to control everything, include create the universe. And so when we desire that somebody would be in control, even if it's not us, then we give things to God that we really don't want. And neither does God. God does not desire to manipulate our lives so that we do. Because then it takes away all of our own complicity in
Mhm.
everything. So what happens if you decide that you're going to drink 6 beers and then get in a car and you end up killing somebody? Is that part of God's plan, or is that on you?
Yeah. Bad decision either way.
Okay, so another place where this goes, this messes with another concept that we have of God being all-knowing.
Yeah, and why would he allow that in the first place?
If God knows that that's
Sure.
going to happen, why would he let you get in the car?
Right.
Right? Well, okay, so loves you enough that you have free will, so he gets to make your own choices. But
Yeah.
if God is all-knowing and loves that other person that much, then you know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So there are no easy answers to this.
No, and that's just
None.
one car accident. I mean, think of the bigger, worldly, terrible events that have occurred.
So then we start talking about, like, what really is sin, right? Is sin the cause of all this? So some people would say what allows you to get into that car and make that bad choice is sin. That if you really were following God's plan, or if you were really in love with God and in a good relationship with God and not sinning, then you wouldn't do those things. And
Right.
and I would argue that absolutely that's true, because you would not make some of the bad choices.
Okay.
But let's not even go to something that extreme. You know, what about going 6 miles an hour over on the interstate?
Yeah.
Or what about picking up your phone to look at the text that came in?
Yeah.
You know, you're just making a split-second decision that ends up costing
Mm-hmm.
dearly. And so, you know, we can make this so gray that it'd be hard for somebody to say, well, of course we know texting and driving is terrible. You shouldn't do it. It's against the law. We didn't know that for a while.
Right.
And so, you know, how do we want to do that? But what about, like, okay, so I was on a trip to Colorado when I was in middle school or high school or something. My family's on this trip. I was 15, so yeah, I was going into high school. And we were heading out to California. We went through Colorado, and we drove by a mountain, and I remember seeing the sign that said, "Watch for falling rocks," right? And on the news later that night, we found out that had we left an hour later, we probably would have gotten hit by the falling rock. I mean, we literally went on that road
Whoa.
and missed that rock
Yeah.
because we went an hour earlier than that
right.
rock fell. Let's get the lights here.
There we go.
So this, then what if we had, decided to linger that day?
Mm-hmm. Gets you thinking.
So all of these things
Yeah.
kind of play into this. So, you could go, oh gosh, thank God that was not part of God's plan.
But the
But
other family.
what if it had been?
Yeah, and the other family that was impacted by the rock, or
Yeah.
sounds like somebody was.
Even
Why-
if there was no
yeah,
other family, there could have been.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Right?
Vehicle. Yeah.
Okay. So we probably raised about 8 different questions
Yeah,
in
sorry.
this whole conversation.
I
And that's
tend
okay.
to do that.
No, it really is, because all of these are intertwined, right?
Yeah,
God's omniscience,
Mhm.
which is all-knowing, God's omnipresence, being everywhere, and I would argue also in every time, so every time and place. And then God's omnipotence, which is God has all power, right? So all-knowing, all-present, all-power.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you deal with a God that has that stuff, and yet the world is the way it is? And I would argue that it really all comes down to free will. And that
Okay.
free will, without free will, there is no true love. And, your daughter's young still,
Mm-hmm.
but you know that you can't control everything that she does,
Absolutely not.
right? and as they get older, so many parents see their teenage or young adult children make decisions that they warned them not to make,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they still make them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't make the same mistake I did. Let me tell you what happened when I did that, and yet they still do it. And you're tempted to go, God, I told you so,
Right.
Why didn't you learn from me?
Yeah.
And yet especially being a safety guy,
Sure.
that sometimes people have to make their own mistakes to learn from it.
Yes,
right?
they do.
They think, well, that won't happen to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you cannot control everything. And even a God that could, wouldn't. Because without free will, without the freedom to make your own choices, there can be no true love.
Okay.
Because I have to choose to love you.
Okay.
If I'm forced to love you, it's not a real love.
Yeah. All
And
right.
so a God that really wants a relationship with us needs to allow for you to make the choice of whether or not you're going to love God back.
All right.
Otherwise, it doesn't work. God unconditionally loves you,
Mm-hmm.
but the only way that you can unconditionally love God back is if you can choose that for yourself, if you have full control over that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
We know that in our own relationships.
Sure.
That it's not a true love unless there's that free will. Okay, so how do you let somebody have free will and make all their choices for them?
Ooh.
I've wrestled with this for years.
Can't be done.
You can't be done.
I mean, knee-jerk answer cannot be done.
Cannot be done. And so really when we're thinking about big theological questions like this, and I would argue that everybody's a theologian, the minute you start thinking, what's God really like, and how does God relate to me, you're a theologian.
Okay.
Because theology is the study of God.
Yeah.
It's thinking about how God works in the world.
And I would argue that a lot of people, Christians or non-Christians, do this more often than they realize.
Oh yeah, everything in our life is
Yeah.
spiritual. It's all interconnected.
Yep.
And so even if you're not thinking about God in God's self, it's still a question of how do we relate in the world, and that we can't do that outside of God, because God is part of all of it, right?
Mhm.
And so as we start thinking about those, it's really important for us to make figure out what's the most fundamental theological choice you have to make. And I would argue that if love is the answer, and really that's where Jesus comes down, right?
Yep.
We're supposed to love God. We're supposed to love our neighbor. It was in the Shema, the original Jewish commandment. Like this is the one that blows everything else out of the water. It's love. Well, if love is the most important thing, then that's what needs to guide the rest of our understanding. And it starts to shape that. That question you had about, did I break my leg because it was part of God's plan, or did it just happen?
Yeah.
And then, like, can anything good come of that?
Okay.
Okay. So, if you had, at the time, thought, I've been going to church and this still happens, so what the heck am I doing going to church? And you just let it go,
Sure.
right? Then that would have been a situation where, God maybe would have intervened and said, wait, I broke your leg because of some reason that's going to happen down your life, and you need to have that experience. But no, that's not going to happen. It sounds ridiculous when I say it, right?
Sure, it does.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, and you could have left the church, and that could have been the consequence of that. But you stayed. And the love relationship that you have with God now is I think it's much more profound and much larger because of any bad experience you've gone through and worked through it and known that God was present with you during that time and known that life still goes on and that you can still find love in the world after that and that it's not the end of everything. And so, even in our darkest times, and I started out with one tonight, right?
Yeah.
You know that love prevails. Love prevails. And so that's what it boils down to me for this particular question.
Okay.
Love prevails. And so, does God know everything that's going to happen? I think so. And we can talk about that on another night. Because that is really one that I think will answer a lot of questions too. But it's all intertwined. And so, you really do have to just sit and think about what do these flippant things that people say,
Yeah.
what's the end result of that? And the end result of all things happen for a reason and they're all part of God's plan really most of the time boils down to a God that doesn't really love any of us. And so I can't go there.
No.
It doesn't help, if you're thinking, what could have been had I been able to win state or even go to state or
what would I have
finish the
accomplished?
season, right?
And even still, I'm not, chomping at the bit to go for a jog or this or that. I will choose another sport because I always kind of go back to, well, what if that happens again? I'd be laid up or whatever.
So maybe at the end of this, you might come down to the conclusion that, that happened to me as a senior in high school so that when I'm older, I can decide that maybe that sport is not the best for me because my body's prone to that injury.
Yeah, it could
and
be.
so I'll try other sports.
Yeah.
And so that's a good that comes out of it. But even then, did you have to break your leg in order for that to happen? No.
Yeah.
No. You might have found other sports
Right.
another way.
Probably would have been an easier solution.
Probably. and you wouldn't have had to be on crutches for 6 weeks, right?
Exactly.
So, we're just on a search for easy answers, where there are no easy answers. And life can get messy.
Yeah.
And really, without just talking about it, without figuring it out like this, we'll go on wondering, why would a God that does this claim to be a God of love?
Yeah.
So it's really good that, we can be in community and we can have
I
these
agree.
conversations.
Yeah.
Right?
No, they've been certainly worthwhile and helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the conversations that we've been having like this has sparked some interest from people in our community.
Good.
Who have submitted questions, and I'll just tell you right now, we probably won't get to all of them. Maybe we will. Joel and I have talked about this offline. We talked about when we can get back together and worship indoors and in the same place, that maybe we would even do this in the midst of a normal worship service, right? That
Yeah.
we would just sit down and have a conversation. The one caveat to that is, I can control the amount of time that we take
Correct.
when I'm writing a sermon out, but sometimes it's hard to know how long these are going to be. And,
Correct,
and you
yeah.
wouldn't want to shortchange the conversation, right?
Mhm.
And even tonight, I feel like we have so many other questions we need to
Yeah.
to approach.
Yeah, sometimes I ramble when I get to, when I want to ask a question, but I don't really know how to even ask just one, because your mind can quickly race to that second, third, fourth, eighth question down the road. But that's why I really appreciate these opportunities. you know.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think that we all do this. We all have
Mhm.
these questions that we struggle with, and most of us just don't have time to really struggle through it. But when you get asked them over and over again, then you start to think, well, maybe I should really think through this.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of the luxury of doing what I do, is I actually get to take the time
Yeah, exactly.
to really think this through, and then I get to share it,
Yeah.
which is really fun for me.
Yeah.
So
And we appreciate the guidance in the answers, and and you can take comfort in, I certainly listen to these, and I appreciate these, and I value the insight. But you're right. It's a God of love. It has to be a God of love.
yeah, that's what it boils down for me.
Yeah.
That's like the basic.
Yeah.
And if God, and I've even heard it said, God is love. Well, if that's the
Mhm.
case, then everything needs to lay on that foundation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you have something else that's the foundation, like if a God of judgment is the foundation, then things start to crumble with
Yeah.
that foundation, because it's not nearly as strong
Yeah.
as love, right? Of course, that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah. All right.
Just the way these things come
Yeah.
up, right?
Yeah.
So, just a reminder for you out there who are watching this. First of all, thanks for tuning in. I know that even at the beginning of this, maybe you were like, "Oh gosh, where's this going?" And I don't know if this might be too touchy for a Sunday morning when I just want to feel good, right?
Mhm.
But we thank you for being a part of our community and for watching this, because it's, we're in this together. We've heard that way too many times through this coronavirus thing, that we're all in this together, and it almost starts to sound like it's not really true, and we certainly feel some division some places, but we really are a community,
Mhm.
and we really do need each other, and when we're apart, it's really hard to maintain that understanding and that feeling of being
Yeah.
together in this. And so, thank you for taking the time with us this morning, and my love goes out to you across the airways here in this time, and when we can get together in person worship, which we're still doing through the summer, every other week, which is just great to be able to see people's faces and be in the same place
Yeah.
as them, right?
Yeah.
In the meantime, Joel and I are going to continue to do some of these, because as you've figured out, there are so many questions that we can still approach and attempt to answer, right, in the short amount of time that we
Right.
give these. In the meantime, support your local community of faith. Give to them so that they can continue the ministries that are so important in your community, and give to St. Luke. If this is your community, or if you don't have a community and you'd like to join, we invite you to be a part of us on the internet for now, and when we can get back together, you are certainly welcome to be with us. And the gifts that we give to our local communities they're really about saying thank you to God for all that God gives us, but also being a part of something larger than us.
Mhm.
And that's just something that we all need to be. We need to be a part of something larger than us. So, send in your checks to St. Luke. You can find the physical address on stlukenewton.com. That's STLukeNewton, all one word, .com. And you can also submit your questions as well. If you have some that come up because of this, or if there's a particular one that you want us to address, that can be submitted to worship@stlukenewton.com. Again, blessings to you this week, and until we can be together again, keep thinking about the way that you relate to God and how God relates to you, and being that theologian, because we all are theologians, right?
Mhm.
That's what it means to be in a relationship. So,
Yep.
and until then, I'm Chad Jennings,
Joel Mills.
and it's good to see you again. Good night.